Hello guys, we are the Reddit squad. If you want to join us, hit the subscribe button. Now let us begin with the Ask Reddit. What was the dumbest thing you thought as a child? I used to think that once you finished a grade in primary school you became smarter than the teacher of that grade. Just like Pokemon gym leaders. In Pokemon Origins, it's shown that the gym leaders use weaker teams to match how many badges you had. Finally something makes sense. I used to believe that night is brought about by clouds, dark ones, of course. Never felt the need to clarify this with anybody. It was an obvious fact. I used to think trees made wind. Trees move. Wind happens, can't explain that. Edit. My highest rated comment is about how dumb of a kid I was. Thanks for the silver. Kind stranger tips Fedora. That a BJ meant you blow air in a boy's general direction. Thanks to my older siblings for making me believe that one, lol. I knew it was more than in a general direction. But I did think the phrase was fairly literal. Poor first boyfriend. This was something that came up in middle school. Long story short, a boy comes back from the bathroom during a school event. School was not in session but people were on the grounds. I want to say it was a basketball game. And proclaims he got a BJ and stated, "I don't know why my dad makes a big deal about it. It didn't feel good at all. She just blew the whole time and I never got hard." That if you drink while peeing you'll keep peeing until you stop drinking. Why are you drinking while peeing first of all? I'm not. Or rather I didn't. Cause I didn't want to infinitely pee. When I was really young, I was convinced I was pregnant. I'm a man BTW, with a baby cat named Bridget. My family decided to see how long I would believe this, so they never told me how ridiculously impossible that was. I went on believing it for about 5 months. That's how long little me thought cat pregnancy lasted, and then when the baby never came, I went to my mom and asked when Bridget would be born. She finally told me that boys can't get pregnant and humans can't give birth to cats. I was traumatized. Little me was so excited to be a cat father, and then it was ripped away from me. I was such a stupid kid. Edit. Since so many people keep asking. No, I never ended up getting a cat. And no, I didn't cat LMAO. This would have been around 6 years old, and I was raised Catholic and thought God put babies in your stomach. So I thought he put a cat in me. And as for the name, I just really liked the name Bridget, and I still do. I'm sorry for your loss, but I am crying laughing at my desk right now. I really want to give little you a hug because this is precious. I believed hamburger and hot dog buns were only available for restaurants, not civilians. Mom used sliced bread, toasted to obliterate the gums, at home to make burgers and hot dogs. I believed that until the age of 10. Can you imagine? Such dangerous items in the hands of the untrained public? Better leave it to the professionals. I was under the impression that there were tiny rats that lived inside of my stomach, and when they ran in their wheels for exercise it would make me need to pee. WTF. That there's a tiny human inside the TV who executed what the remote was telling him to do. For example, when you press the button to increase the volume, he is being hit in a specific way that lets him know that he has to go and manually increase the volume. I imagined a barracks full of tiny men living in the tap who poured out little buckets of water when I used the sink. I felt terrible as a kid to eat. I wouldn't eat in front of people, and every meal I would find myself thinking poor food getting eaten because I was convinced they had emotions. I anthropomorphized everything as a kid. I also felt bad for the food I ate and for stepping on grass. The worst was stuffed animals. I remember we had a Christmas thing at school in first grade in which everybody brought a gift and then the teacher drew numbers to see who would get to pick the next gift. There was a huge Cabbage Patch tea set that all of the girls were drooling over, including me. Well, my number was called first. but I skipped the tea set and picked this dirty old teddy bear because I could not stand the thought of him sitting there watching as everything else got picked before him. Grandparents were assigned to families. Like, I didn't know my grandma was my dad's mom. I don't know what I thought, but I remember being at my great grandmother's funeral and asking my mom why my grandma was crying. When she replied she is sad because her mother died, I was like, head explode, so that's why we had to go visit her all the time. I just assumed she was this random old lady and I didn't like to visit her because I couldn't be my rambunctious chatty little 4-year-old self. My mom is a shusher. I then had to ask about all of our other relatives. Own 2 credit cards and use them to pay for each other for infinite money, depending on your age at the time. That's actually a pretty good understanding of credit cards for a kid. Incorrect, sure, but better than most kids understand it. Honestly, I've seen adults with a worse understanding. I knew someone who thought she could just buy whatever as long as she could make the minimum payment. People that died in movies really died. I was watching a movie with my dad wherein the main character had his arm cut off. I turned to my dad and asked, "That's fake, right?" And my dad, very sincerely, said no. That actor's getting paid a lot of money to have his arm cut off. And all the color drained from my face and I said, "Oh, okay." I was in my early 20s when I had that aha moment where I realized he was messing with me. I had the opposite with my dad. I said something like, "Wow, she must have gotten paid a lot to cut her arm off for a movie," and he just looked at me like, "What are you, stupid?" I used to think my mom was such a good shopper. She would pick out all these groceries, and when she got up to the checker, she would only give them one piece of money, and they would give her several pieces of money back and we got to keep the groceries. That ATM machines were free money machines. ATM, anytime money. I grew up in Ohio, you know, cows and corn and farms as far as the eye can see. Well, when I was young, I would often see these large hay rolls in the fields, and a lot of the time, these hay rolls would be wrapped in white plastic. I legitimately thought, for years, that these were giant marshmallows, and that this is where they came from. I believed they grew out in those fields like a plant, and that they were later chopped down to a smaller size before being sold. It took me way longer than I care to admit before I realized the truth. That when, without moving my head, I moved my eyeballs to look around, that meant anything behind me didn't exist for that moment because it was just darkness. Only things that my eyes can see exist. If I turned around, the world would construct itself quickly, and the world behind me would disintegrate. I spent some time every day spinning around so the world would exist all the time. How do you know that anything does really exist outside of your perception of it? Solipsism in a nutshell. Let me start by saying that I was quite little. I think I was about 7 or 8 years old. We lived in the country and I was raised on Disney movies. We lived on our imaginations. Anyways, the movie The Borrowers had just come out and we rented it on VHS. My sister and I must have watched it 20 times. We played games imagining people running around and all these fantastical things. It was great. It passed a lot of time for us. Enter bedtime. I crawl into my little bed, swirls of games in my head, and I notice a strange light in my closet that is directly across from the foot of my bed. I gingerly crawl out and open my closet to see a small slit in the drywall. I press my eye up to it and see a sun and trees. There is a whole world in my wall of my closet. Holy shit, the borrowers have a world in my closet. I run and get my sister. I show her. We freak out and run downstairs where my father is gently reading his newspaper after a long day of work. My mother is sitting there talking to him when we bust around the corner screaming about a hidden world in the closet. My father glares at my mother. My mother tells us she will look into it and brings us back to bed and reads us another story to calm us down. The next night there was no light. The trees were gone. I destroyed the world. I truly thought I had erased this little existence. I was a murderer. Number. I had seen a slip of my mother's marijuana closet farm. My dad made her move it. Child innocence and overworked imaginations. The magic of childhood.